I have one more also question. Andrei Sipenko actually said today that he was preparing against you yesterday, and he came to the game unprepared. And in general, have you seen the game with Levon? And what do you think? What are your comments?
You're saying he thought he had white against me today. Okay, well, I guess that explains his opening. I mean, I thought Levon tried to do something I did, which was very creative. Yeah, I mean, it happens obviously, but end of the day, we'll see. We'll see about tomorrow.
Did it affect you a little bit when you saw what was happening in the other game, which finished so quickly for Levon?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, I think, I play chess for fun, and that's that. So, not really.
Okay. Thank you very much and for your comments, and all the best in the last round.
And welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be going over my 5th round game, the penultimate round of the FIDE Grand Prix here in Berlin. And in this round, I had the white pieces against none other than Grigoriy Oparin, who was leading the group after a very big victory in round 4 against Andrei Yesipenko. So obviously going to this game, I knew that I was going to have to try to press. I figured I had the white pieces against Grigoriy, Levon had the white pieces against Andrei. Odds of Levon winning his game I thought were pretty high, and so I felt like this was a must-win game for me. Alright, without further ado, let's jump right into the game. So the game starts d4, knight f6, c4, and now Grigoriy plays e6, knight c3, bishop b4, and I play the queen c2 variation of the Nimzo Indian defense. Now, in a previous round against Andrei, I played e3, castles, bishop d2. There are other lines like e3, knight g2, or bishop d3 with knight e2. Many different setups, but for this game, I felt that queen c2 made the most sense. So I played queen to c2 here. Grigoriy plays d5. And now I play a3, we trade, and now he castles, and I play knight f3. Now, normally this position occurs from a different move order, which is why I took a little bit of time here playing a3, because the traditional order is castles, a3, bishop takes c3, queen c3, d5, knight f3. So that's why in this position I used about 3 minutes just trying to remember exactly what the alternatives were in case Grigoriy played something different after a3, bishop c3, queen c3. But sure enough, he castles, knight to f3, d takes c4, queen takes c4, and now he plays b6. Now, I myself have played this a lot with the black pieces, so I'm very familiar with the different variations. Now, again, I had a rest day yesterday, so there was a lot of time to do preparations for this game. Now, on the rest day, I was thinking to myself, okay, Grigoriy does not normally play this variation, but if he does, what can I really do? Because this is the most solid setup. And so I thought to myself, well, I am a streamer first and foremost. I might as well play to the memes. So I thought to myself, what would the greatest chess player of all time, and it's not Magnus, by the way, the greatest chess player of all time, Garry Chess, do here? So I chose to play this move h4. Now, of course, Garry Kasparov played this in the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament in, I believe, 2018. Fact checkers can tell me if I'm wrong. He played it against Sergei Karyakin. He played against Levon Aronian. He also played against myself. So Garry played this quite a bit, and I thought, you know what, it's an unusual line. It hasn't really been popular of late. Maybe it'll surprise Grigoriy. So he plays bishop a6 immediately. Now I go queen c2, and he plays c5. Now already I was a little bit unhappy because objectively there isn't a whole lot going on in this position, and black should be able to equalize pretty easily if it doesn't come as a surprise and he's ready for this variation. So now I take on c5. Knight bd7 is played, and now I go c6. I do not take the pawn on b6 because, again, I've already violated a lot of the opening principles. I've pushed a pawn on the wing. I'm not developed on the king side or the queen side. So trying to grab material here is simply too greedy because after rook c8, let's say I go queen d1, queen takes b6, black can go rook d8. Their ideas like knight e5, black has finished development. All of his pieces are very much in the game here, and I have uno, do, what do I have? I have uno, dos, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pieces that are not developed here at all, so I'm in really, really bad shape. So instead I play c6, Grigoriy goes rook c8, pinning the pawn on c6. Now I play bishop g5, and now he plays bishop b7. Now prior to the game, the little bit of preparation that I had done, I had looked at this move knight to b8. I did not actually look at this bishop b7 move, because I simply did not expect to get to this position. So bishop b7 is played here, play knight to d4, and now he plays this move knight e5. I do believe the e5 is also a move here, and after knight f5, rook c6, queen d2, white should be relatively okay, I thought. Anyway, he goes knight e5 here, and now I was definitely out of my preparation. So I played rook d1, which is a logical move. Again, I can't take the bishop because I lose my queen, and the knight on d4 is also under attack. I also considered maybe trying e3, but again, after knight c6, bishop c6 here, black is a great bishop. Again, I'm lacking development, and I have 4 pieces that aren't doing anything at all, so I don't want to go for this. So I play rook d1 here, guarding the knight on d4, and now he plays queen e7. Knight c6, by the way, does not work here because I have a very nice tactic here, which is I can play knight takes e6, and if black takes a knight, I take the queen. And additionally, if he goes knight d4 here, I thought that after rook d4, f takes e6, I could play a move like queen d1, and I should be okay. Again, computer gives black a lot of counterplay after a move like queen e7 because I have no development here on the king side, but I thought this was playable at the very least. So instead, queen e7 here is played by Grigoriy. I go rook h3. Now, this move may come as a surprise to a lot of people. However, there were other variations where after you play h4, you do this classic rook lift to bring the rook into the game. Now, again, looking at this very sort of philosophically, you think to yourself early on, what is the point of playing h4? What is the reason you push this pawn? Because again, you're not really getting a big attack on the king side here. Like, this pawn isn't really, even the pawn gets like h5, there's always h6, so you're not really attacking. So what is the reason behind pushing this pawn to h4? And the reason is that you want to potentially do a rook lift and bring the rook into the game via h3. Now, this is a new age idea, very much in the style of computer play, but fortunately I was aware of it. So I play rook h3 here. Knight c6 is played, I take, and I use a lot of time here, by the way, on rook h3, because after knight c6 takes, if black takes with the bishop here, I wasn't really so sure if I have anything. I thought after rook c3, bishop b7, the game is petering out here, and I felt that the most likely result here will be a draw. Fortunately, Grigoriy played rook takes knight instantly, and now I got to play queen a4. And while I suspect this isn't great for white, it gets tricky, and there's no clear-cut path to a simple, straightforward draw for black here. So Grigoriy used a lot of time. I think he thought for about 20 minutes to play h6, and after takes queen a7, he thought for another 35 to 40 minutes on this move. Now, the reason that he thought for so long, I think, is twofold. First of all, I suspect that he had miscalculated this line with queen b2. After queen d7, it looks like after rook c1, black is attacking here. Say I play a move like h5 to illustrate the point. Black can trade and go queen b1 check and collect the bishop on f1. And if I go rook d3 here, for example, I play rook d3. After rook d1, if I take, there's the same problem. And if I take with the rook, he can just go check, rook d2, and he has a move like rook d8, which is probably winning. There's also the idea of just making a repetition in all these lines. Now, again, in this specific position, rook d8 is winning, but it's just to illustrate the point that there's always this draw possibility. However, after rook c1, I can play queen d7 here. And after rook takes rook, queen takes rook, rook c8, it looks like black is going to go rook c1 and win the game. But I have this very nice move, rook to b3, attacking the queen on d1 guards it, and after queen a2, I can play a very simple move like pawn to e3, and now there's no rook c1 threat, so I'm simply up a bishop. So I suspect that Grigoriy miscalculated this, but also, as he pointed out after the game, he also miscalculated this line with rook d8. He initially thought after rook d8, takes rook, king takes, queen d4. After rook d3, he could play queen c4, threatening checkmate and 1 on c1. Now, this looks very, very scary here, but once again, in this position, I can just very quietly play pawn to e3, and if he plays queen to c1, king to e2, if he plays rook c2 check, I go king f3, queen takes bishop, but now I have rook d8 check, king h7, and queen e4 to collect the rook on c2. So Grigoriy, I suspect at this point, when he used about 25 minutes to play h6, he simply miscalculated this position, and then he sunk into a very deep think here, and he thought for about 40 minutes. And I will say, looking back on the result, his time usage on these two moves is probably the reason that he lost this game. So he goes bishop a8 here. Now I play rook b3. Of course, you got to lift your rooks, bruh. So I play rook b3, I attack b6, but I also guard b2. Now here Grigoriy plays rook d8, which is a great move. At this point already, I'm starting to feel like I might be a little bit better, because if he plays a move like queen h4, I can go rook takes b6, rook takes rook, queen takes, and if queen h1, I have a very nice move, pawn to f3, followed by queen f2. Of course, I have rook d8, which is winning as well, but it's just to illustrate the positional point as well. After f3, queen h4, queen f2, this is simply winning for white. So I was already starting to get very optimistic here, but Grigoriy found rook d8, and the reason that I was also optimistic is I thought that after rook d3, rook c8, in this position, I could simply play this move rook to f3. Unfortunately, after queen takes b2, queen f7, king h8, there's simply no way to keep attacking here, and black has all his pieces lined up on the c file and the queen on b2 to go after the king, the rook, and the bishop on d1, e1, and f1. And also after rook d3, black cannot take on d3 here because I take with check, and after king h7, there are a couple ways to win, but probably the cleanest is simply to take with pawn and then develop my bishop to e2. So rook c8 is played, and now I played rook d4. Now this whole line that I played with rook d4 was based on a miscalculation when I played rook d3 initially back in this position. So he plays e5, I go rook d2, and I do want to add one funny anecdote for people in chat who are wondering. Now, sometimes during my games, ever since I've become a streamer, or I should say the 2 events I played here in Berlin specifically, there have been moments where during a game, there's been something that's distracted me and a song has just started playing in my head. Now, in my first game against Richard Lepore during the first FIDE Grand Prix here in Berlin, there was a moment during that game where there were a lot of people outside. They were actually protesting COVID, oddly enough. And there were like drums, there was a lot of music, and at some point during that game, there was a song, I don't remember what it was called. It was from this Indian movie, Bajiro, I forget what it's called exactly. Chat, again, you guys in your comments, you can let me know what exactly the song was. But there was some song where there was a lot of dancing, loud music, and that started playing in my head. Now, during this game, for whatever reason, because I played rook h3, rook b3, rook d3, rook d4, rook d2, I started thinking of my rook, and it felt like it was moving kind of like a helicopter. Now, those of you who are familiar with Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, there's a very famous video on YouTube where Kasparov is giving a speech in Moscow. And at a certain point, there's a little thingy that starts flying around. And in the YouTube video, there's a song called Helicopter, Helicopter that they start having as the background music. And in my mind, this song started playing at this moment in the game for whatever reason, and it was actually quite hard not to break out laughing, you know, when this was happening in my head. At any rate, I play rook d2 here, queen takes h4 is played, and now I play g3. Now again, when I went for this whole line, I thought that I was already a little bit better here, because I thought that after queen to f6, I have this very nice move bishop h3 to attack the rook on c8. Now that's also one reason that here I played rook d4 as opposed to rook d2, is that I thought that in a position like this with the pawn on e6, I have no idea like bishop h3, but if I can provoke the pawn forward, after queen f6, bishop h3, say black plays rook f8, I can now play a move like queen d7 and rook d6. I'm doing really well here. Now all of my pieces are perfectly developed. So after g3, queen h1 is played. Now this I thought was a great move, because when I played g3, I actually thought that at this point I was much better, but I simply overlooked a very tricky tactic, which is I thought rook d8 was good, but after rook d8, king h7, I thought queen f7 was actually just winning. However, black has a really nasty move, queen takes f1, and after king f1, rook c1, this actually leads to a checkmate because my king has no squares, and after I block, he takes, and again, the bishop from distance ends the game. So initially I thought this was winning, and much to my horror, when I actually was looking at this during the game, I also assumed that somehow after king h7 there should be some way to draw with like queen takes a8, but after rook c1, king d2, queen takes f1 here, I simply have nothing better than to play a move like queen e4, g6, king to e3, and now after rook c5, which is a great move, I have to play queen d3, queen c1, queen d2, and make a draw, which obviously was not what I wanted here. Now I do see with the computer, it does say there's this move queen d7, but after rook c1, king d2, apparently black is able to draw here with bishop e4, king c1, queen f1, and queen f2. Again, if I had seen this in the game, probably I would have played it, but I simply didn't see this queen d7 move, which is why I rejected this outright. But apparently this is good. So at any rate, I play queen e7. Now the idea is very simple behind queen e7. I want to play rook d8, but also I want to have this queen h4 idea to exchange the queens, because my bishop and my king are a little bit airy here, and I'm a little bit worried that he's going to be able to go bishop g2 at some point. So it's sort of a multifunctional move. I have queen h4 for the bailout, but I also have rook d8 as well. So now rook f6 is played by Grigoriy. I play rook d8, he trades, I take with the queen, and now he goes king h7. And here I started feeling very relieved, because after this f3 move, I really can't be in danger here anymore. Now it's very unfortunate for black that bishop takes f3 does not work, because after pawn takes, rook takes, it looks like uh-oh spaghetti-o, there's this pin and I'm in a lot of trouble. But I have the very nasty move king to d2, with the idea of playing bishop e2 next move. Say black plays a move like h5, just bishop e2, and I'm winning. And if black takes the bishop, now I can go queen d3, checking the king on h7 and winning the rook on f1. So fortunately, bishop takes f3 doesn't work. So now Grigoriy plays bishop e4, and this is a big mistake here. What he should have done was he very simply, I think, should have played bishop c6 here, and after rook d6, if he plays a move like queen g1, rook f6, queen g3, say king d1, takes queen f6, queen g6, this game should be a draw because black has queen b1 here at the end, and if I trade the queens, the material is just completely even here. We both have 4 pawns, and it should be a draw. So Grigoriy had already gotten kind of low on time, which is why he makes this mistake with bishop e4, and now I go rook d6. And I don't know if Grigoriy flat out missed rook d6 or what exactly happened, but black is definitely in some trouble now. Now the reason black's in trouble is because after rook takes d6, queen d6, I'm going to be winning a pawn on either e5 or b6, and bishop f5 does not work here because now I can go queen takes b6, bishop h3, and queen f2 to guard the bishop, and now I have 2 pawns on the queen side, and they're just going to run down the board and end it immediately. So instead, Grigoriy very resourcefully finds this move queen g1, and now I take on e5. I cannot take the bishop on e4 here because after queen g3, if I go king d2, there's queen f4 check. I have to go back, and then it goes queen g3. And if I go king d1 here, black is a very nice move, queen to g1, and there's no way for me to guard this bishop here other than to go back to e1, and after queen g3, as I said, it's always just a draw no matter what I do. So here I take on e5. Now Grigoriy plays bishop g6, and I go pawn to g4. Now the reason I played g4 here was twofold. Initially I wanted to play b4 with the idea of playing a4 and a5, but after f6, queen d6, I got kind of worried about this h5 move, and initially it doesn't look like it's anything special, but now after a4, black can go bishop f5 with the idea of bishop h3 because of this pin, and I can't go g4 because the pawn on h5 will capture. So once I saw this idea, I thought, well, g4 has to be the right move logically because I stop any of these ideas like bishop f5, I get rid of a weakness, and I also create a connect 3 here from e2 to g4. So Grigoriy plays f6, and now I go queen f4, and he plays queen c5, and here I felt like I actually sort of took my foot off the gas a little bit. I should have probably played this move a4 with the idea of b4 and a5, trying to get my pawns moving immediately, because in the game I simply didn't realize that my pawns are way too slow. They're almost never advancing on the queen side. So I play queen d2 here. Grigoriy plays f5. Now the idea behind queen d2 is quite simple. If black plays queen g1, I want to go e4. Everything's guarded. I can play queen f2 next move, and eventually I assume the pawns will start to roll on the queen side. So instead, Grigoriy plays f5, which is a fantastic move, I think, because what it does is, first of all, it challenges my pawn chain, but also it creates an imbalance where black now has a pass pawn on the h file. So even though I have a pass pawn in the center, even if I get e4, for example, this pawn is never really pushing up the board fast, whereas this h pawn can go down really, really fast. So instead, I play e3 here. Grigoriy plays queen e5, and now I play f4. Initially, I thought that after f4, queen e7, I could play bishop to e3. But again, one of the problems with this endgame, since we've had this exchange on f5, is now after queen h4, king d1, let's just say black checks and plays a move like h5. This queen and pawn endgame is actually probably a draw because, again, this h pawn is really, really fast. Whereas if we go back to this position, let's say here, for example, I'll just make some random moves. This endgame, for example, is probably very close to winning for white because, again, black does not have a pass pawn on the h file. So this f5 idea was really, really good by Grigoriy. So it goes queen e7, I play bishop g2. Logical move, put the bishop on this diagonal. Additionally, I felt that my idea is to try and bring the king from e1 to g1 to stop this h pawn from getting down to h1. So h5 is played. I go queen d4, and now Grigoriy plays queen h4, which I think is a slight inaccuracy. I did feel that after h4, e4, h3, black probably should be okay here after bishop h1. It's something like bishop g4. Again, the bishop is really, really cramped here, and if I do go e5, black will always be able to get a blockade on f5. So I thought this was maybe more precise. Instead, he checks on h4. I go king to f1, and now he goes queen g4. And here I played queen d2, and I started to feel very optimistic here because I saw that I have e4 coming in. Queen guards the pawn. I also have queen e2 to exchange the queens, and I thought it was getting really, really close to a serious advantage here. So Grigoriy plays h4, I play queen e2, and now Grigoriy plays the fateful move of the game. Now, one thing you have to remember about these positions is that after move 40, or one thing you need to remember about the time control, I should say, is that after move 40, there is no additional time. So we both get 30 minutes for the rest of the game. And generally speaking, in these sorts of situations here, where somebody is slightly worse, if they're also down on the clock, it makes it very, very difficult to defend as well, which is why Grigoriy played the very interesting move g5. Now, objectively, this move probably loses the game. It leads to an endgame which should be lost, I think, by force. But at the same time, it's very creative because Grigoriy figures, well, he's down to 12 minutes here. I think I had about 45 minutes. And if we play on, eventually, I can probably massage the position like queen f2, queen f6, go like king g1, king h2, maybe e4 later. I just massage it, just play slow moves, try to improve. And Grigoriy doesn't have obvious moves, so he's going to have to use a lot of time and probably get into time pressure. So by playing g5 here, I thought this was a really creative move because what it does is it forces an endgame where Grigoriy will be able to play very quickly. There won't be many decisions or a lot of calculation. However, it is also very double-edged because it leads to a very tricky endgame where either black is completely fine or he's going to make an easy draw or he's completely lost. So here, after thinking for a long time, I decided to trade the queens because I simply didn't see any other alternatives. So we trade. And now here I played bishop c6. Now, one thing that's very important to note in endgames is it's not actually always about precise calculation, but sometimes it's about envisioning which endgames are winning and which ones aren't. Now, in my mind, if I take on g5 and king g6 happens, I figure best case scenario here, I'm getting a situation where I'm going to have e and a pawns. Now, again, I suspect that this endgame is better, but I'm not really sure if this is winning because, again, king is getting over to the queen side very quickly, and after bishop d7, say we get this position, it feels like the king is too close to both the a pawn and the e pawn, so the pipos are not really split far enough. So I wasn't sure if this is a great endgame. So this is why I rejected FG outright, because I felt that any endgame where I end up with like e and a pawns is probably not winning. So instead I played bishop c6, which is important because initially I thought I would play a4, but after bishop d7, I didn't really see a way to win. Now, oddly enough, the computer says that in this position, after b3, for whatever reason, this is winning. Now, it's not getting depth yet, but apparently this is supposed to be winning for white. Don't ask me why, because with the chess.com engine, it doesn't show the winning line, but apparently this is +3. However, as I said, I thought after b3, king g6, my pawns are stopped. I'm not able to create a passed pawn, so there's no way that conceptually this can be the right plan. So instead I played bishop c6, which is a very logical move. I prevent bishop d7, and now I'm going to go a4, b4, a5, and I'm getting my pass pawn on the a file, whether you like it or not. So here Grigoriy plays king g6, and now I go b4. Important move, by the way, and this is why endgames are also very tricky. If I play this a4 move, the endgame is actually drawn now because black can trade and go bishop e6. Now you'd think, well, just b4, but after king f5, a5, black can trade, bishop c4, king f2, king takes f4, and now the bishop stops the a pawn, and of course after bishop b7, black will just sack, and it's a draw. So if I play a4 takes bishop e6, and I think, okay, well, why not king f2? Now black has bishop to b3, and you'll notice that I'm not getting a passed pawn here. The bishop stops my b pawn from going to b4, and the a pawn was always under attack, and this should be a draw. So you'd be very, very careful in these endgames. So I play b4 here, and the point is that now if black plays a move like bishop e6, I just go king f2, and after takes, there's no bishop b3 because the pawn's on b4, and now I go a4, a5 again, and I should win the game. So after b4, Grigoriy trades. Now, apparently in this position, black has a drawing line with bishop c8. Now, the reason that apparently this is okay is because after I play king f2 here, black has a very mysterious move, king h5. Now, again, this is a very study-like endgame, so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but the reason that this is actually okay for black is very simple. In the game after a move like bishop d1, king f2, takes, whenever black goes king f5, I have king e3, and I always have check on d7 to remove the king from the attack on the pawn on f4. So in retrospect, it looks really obvious because after bishop c8, king f2, king h5, I go a4, black goes king g4. Now you'll notice I don't have this check to go after the king, and now he's starting to take the pawn. If I check on f3 after king f5, I'm forced to trade, and now after a5 takes, this should be a draw, I believe, with king to f5, because again, I have a and e, and black should be able to sacrifice. For example, say I play bishop e2, black can now go h3, and after a move like bishop f3, I believe that black goes king to f6, king g3, king e5, and I think this is a draw because I can never go after this h pawn. If I go here, he goes king e4, and if I go here, king d6, I think black just sits with king d6, king e5 forever, and there's no way to win. So again, I get the a and e pawns, and these pipos are not split far enough for it to be winning. So bishop c8 is actually the best move, and I think after bishop c8 the game should be a draw, but again, it's very mysterious because king f5 even doesn't work, so I just go king f3, and if g4, king f2, this endgame should be winning as well. So it's only this idea of king h5, and if I check on f3, he goes back to g6 with the idea of going to f5, and basically I can't stop the king from getting to f5 or g4, and it should be a draw. But again, very limited time for Grigoriy, and I'm not even sure if I had this position with like half an hour, I would necessarily even come up with this king h5 idea because it's pretty random and pretty hard to see. So Grigoriy plays pawn takes pawn, I take, and now he goes king f6, the logical continuation to try and bring the king over. The one problem is now, you'll notice that I'm getting the wide pipos, but instead of having a and e going up the board, I'm actually going to end up with f and a and f, and they're split one row further apart, or one file further apart. So now I go a4, king to e7 is played, and now I find the very critical move bishop e4. Now again, when I was thinking about this endgame at the start, I thought that the way to win was to get the wide peepos with the a4 and f4 pawns, but there's one very important thing, which is that I need to get this pawn to f6 before a5. Because for example, say I play a random move like this, and we get some position like this, I do believe that this is actually a draw because black can again wait forever on d7, and you'll notice if I go f5, he just takes and goes king b5 to draw the game. And if I go king here, he just waits, and after king e4, now he can go bishop c6, king e5, h3, and h2, and black is actually winning here. So I knew that if we got a5 and f4, this would be a drawn endgame. But when I was thinking about this in my mind, even at the start of this endgame, I realized that black's never going to be able to stop the pawn from getting to f6 here, so it should be completely winning. So black goes bishop d7, play a5, or wait, this isn't line. I go bishop e4, king d6, and now I go f5. Very important here because now the thing is if black goes king e5, I go a5, we trade, and black can't stop the a pawn. If you go bishop h5, I just go a6, bishop e8, a7, bishop controls the diagonal, so it's winning. And if you take on e4, now I go f6, bishop e6, a6, king e5, a7, threatening to queen, bishop d5, f7, and now black can't stop both the pawns, and I'm going to be able to make a queen. So I felt that the pawn was getting to f6, so I knew that this had to be close to winning, because even if let me just set up a random position like this, for example, I knew that with the pawns on a5 and f6, black would never be able to sack, and this is completely winning. So after f5, bishop d1 is played, I go a5, Grigoriy trades, and he goes king c5, and now I play f6, very important move, the pawn is 2 squares from queening, bishop b3, and now I play the move bishop d3. Now this position Grigoriy kind of gives up with his next couple of moves, so I want to give one variation that I did calculate which was winning, which is bishop e6, or sorry, let me just play bishop f7, king g2, bishop e6, bishop f5, say black plays bishop b3, I can actually go king h3 here, and after king b5 I take, king takes a5, I go king to g5 here, king to b6 is played, I go king h6, king to c5, and now I go king g7, king to d6, and now I have the very nice move bishop to g6, and I'm basically threatening to go bishop f7, so let's just say black goes bishop e6, I go bishop f7, bishop g4 is played here, and now I go bishop g8, very important move here, bishop h5, bishop h7, and the idea is to go bishop g6, and I have f7, f8, and this is a winning bishop and pawn endgame, king e6, bishop g6, followed by f7, or bishop e8, bishop g6 is also winning. So this is one sample line that I saw which is winning, which is why I knew that this had to be winning with the pawn on f6. So here king d6 is played by Grigoriy, I go a6 now, and he goes bishop d5, I go a7, and now he plays king c7, which is a little bit disappointing. I was kind of hoping that he would go king e6, and I do not play bishop c4 here because after takes it's actually a check, so I can't queen, but I have the very nice line king g1, king takes f6, bishop to f1, and now there's no way to stop bishop g2, so say he plays h3, I take, king e5, bishop g2, I'm simply going to trade the light square bishops, and I'm going to make a queen on a8 and win the game. So I was really hoping that Grigoriy would play king e6, so it's really a nice touch here to basically get this bishop f1, bishop g2, and queen the pawn, but unfortunately he didn't do that. Instead he plays king c7, and now I decided to have some fun here. I decided to underpromote to a rook on a8, so that when Grigoriy captures with the bishop, I go f7, make a queen next move, and win the game. So I had a little bit of fun under promoting. Didn't have to do that, obviously, but nonetheless, it felt like a fun thing to do, so I did it, and I ended up winning this game, and I'm now tied for the lead going into the 6th and final round of the FIDE Grand Prix here in Berlin in the group stage. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Levon has black against Grigoriy. I have black against Andrei Yesipenko. So it's going to be a fun day. At any rate, I win my 2nd game in a row and we're in the hunt. But I hope you enjoyed the analysis. It was a really fun game to play today. And once again, I'll see you guys all with a recap from round 6 tomorrow. Hopefully it goes well. Until then, keep it real, everybody.